Alright, hello. It is time to set up the remaining dungeons of Dragonflight Mythic Plus Season 1, and that means we are going into the non-Dragonflight dungeons, starting off with Court of Stars. So we're going to walk through each of the bosses, and then we'll talk about the trash at the end. So, first boss, Patrol Captain Gerdo. Is going to be Resonant Slash is going to be a frontal that he does, but it also does it behind him. So we call these buntles. So he does a frontal and a buntle, so you got to watch out for both. And we'll probably want to enable the sound that is our frontal sound for this. So I will go ahead and use 190 from the Retro sound pack, and I will have links to these sound packs down in the description below if you want to use them. And then we have Street Sweeper, which is just a random line. Probably gonna want a unique sound for this. Let's see what's the default. The default is Info from Bigwigs, which I think is a decent sound. Let's try to see if we can find something else. Let's see if there's anything close to 190. That doesn't sound super chaotic. I'd be pretty happy with 188. That's simple enough. That's actually one of my old Resto Druid Weak sounds, but I don't use those anymore. So we can do that for Street Sweeper. So these are basically just two frontals or lines that we're trying to dodge, and then we have Arcane Lockdown, which is a thing that you're going to want to jump for. I probably will enable a countdown for this ability, because this is what we're going to be wanting to be aware of, and we're also going to want to dispel somebody. So don't need to set a specific sound or anything for this, just a countdown, and that'll be enough to let me know that it's happening. And then Signal Beacon, don't need to worry about it. And the Flask, don't need to worry about it because he just goes over to it, drinks it, and dies. So that's it for that boss. Next up is Talixae Flamewreath. And we have Infernal Eruption, which is where she spawns all of the adds and the swirlies. So this is going to be what we want to enable a countdown for, because we're going to want to all be stacked up, ideally, when this ability goes off. So having that countdown, as soon as I start hearing 5, 4, 3, 2, then I can stack in on the tank, and then we are ready to go. And then Burning Intensity is something that we're going to want to interrupt. Or actually, it's Withering Soul. Burning Intensity is just a buff she applies to herself. That's just going to increase her damage done and deal ever-increasing group-wide unavoidable damage. So, something to be aware of, but don't need to adjust anything for it. And then Withering Soul is an interrupt. So I'm actually going to go in here and change the sound to literally just say interrupt, so that I know to interrupt it every time, because I think a 1 melee DPS can solo it. So that means most of the healers that I play can also solo it. So when I'm pugging and stuff, I can just be completely responsible for interrupting this. Alright, and that's it for that boss. We got our countdown set up, we got our specific sound set up. Now we have Advisor Melandrus. All right, we have the Blade Surge. So this is going to be what we want a countdown for. Blade Surge is, if you're a ranged class, you're going to want to be baiting the Blade Surges, ideally all in the same spot. I'll try to make a video about this to specify why you want to do this, but you want to try to bait them all in the same spot. So having a countdown of knowing when he's going to target you with it is really nice, because then when you start hearing that countdown, you can then stand in the same spot where you baited the last one and rinse and repeat. Next up, we have Enveloping Winds, which is going to be just the little like tornadoes that are around the room that kind of just stand still, and if you step in them, they stun you. Piercing Gale, which is going to be when he makes all of his Blade Surge clones shoot like frontals and all that stuff, so we can just enable the frontal sound for this. I'm totally fine with that. So we will enable 190. And then we have Slicing Maelstrom, which is the very, very dangerous ability. And this is going to be the huge group-wide damage that we're going to be wanting to be aware of. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to change the bar color for this one to red, so that I can be extra aware of it on my bars. And then in addition to that, we are going to enable the sound to be Destruction. There we go. Cool. So that's it for him. Now we have trash. And we have the announced buff items. This is all good. We can leave that alone. Quelling Strike, that is a frontal. So we're going to want to enable a frontal noise for that. Though the weak ore I have might already do that, but that's okay. If they overlap, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. We can just remove one or the other. So we have Quelling Strike, we have Fortification, which is an interrupt, or a purge, which we don't really need to worry about, so I'll just leave that alone. And then we have Charging Station, which needs to be interrupted, so I will enable a interrupt sound for that. That just says interrupt.
Interrupt.
And that's on the Guardian constructs. And then we have Charge Smash, which is a frontal, so guess what? We're enabling the frontal sound for this. And then Disrupting Energy, that's the, I believe, that's the zone on the floor from the Charge Smash, so we can ignore that. And then Suppress just needs to be interrupted. So we can pretty much ignore Suppress. We don't need to worry about it. Spellbound Enforcer does Fel Detonation. We can enable a countdown for this, because ideally in higher keys and stuff, you want to line of sight it when the cast is going off, so having a countdown for knowing when it's about to happen would be really nice. And then the Fellblaze Puddle we can ignore, Bewitch we can ignore, Shadowbolt Volley, that just does damage to the group. This is the guy right before the last boss, so we can go ahead and enable a countdown for this as well, just so that we know when that Shadowbolt Volley is going to happen. And then Carrion Swarm is a frontal. Don't need to worry about it though, because I think it always targets the tank. I haven't seen it target anybody else yet, but I could be wrong. And then Shockwave is a frontal, so we will enable the frontal sound for that. And that's on the mini boss before the second boss. This is also a mini boss before the second boss, and we will enable the countdown for the Scream of Pain, which does unavoidable group-wide damage and interrupts us. And then we have Disintegration Beam, which is just an interrupt, so we will enable the interrupt sound for this. That's also on the mini boss before the second boss, since there are 3 of them. So we will have this say interrupt if I keep skipping over it.
Interrupt.
There we go. And then we have the Watchful Inquisitors, which is Eye Storm and Searing Glare. Don't really need to worry about this. You ideally want to stun Eye Storm, but having a specific sound notification for it isn't going to really help me personally, so I'm just going to leave them alone. Drifting Embers, same thing on the Imps. That just needs to be stopped. Charge Blast on the Bound Energy. This needs to be interrupted very, very importantly, so I will enable an interrupt sound for this. And I'm making sure that these packs don't... I'm not overlapping the interrupt sound on top of mobs that are, packed up together, because that would be super annoying. So I'm making sure that they're all spread out so that we'll never have this issue of like the interrupt voice overlapping on top of itself. Maybe it wasn't Charge Blast. Maybe it's actually this Arcane Manifestation. I think it's actually a Drain Mana. Charge Blast looks like Bound Energy. What is Bound Energy? Okay, well, I'm going to say this is a frontal, because that's the way that it is described in the tooltip. And I believe that this is not what I was thinking it was. I think Drain Magic is what I was thinking, which is the very important thing to interrupt, otherwise it does a ton of group-wide damage.
Interrupt.
And then we have the Nightfall Orb. Seal Magic is a frontal. It's all enemies within 10 yards, so we'll just leave that be. Drifting Embers, we already looked at that. Wild Magic, Mighty Stomp, Shadow Flame Breath. I don't even know who Valimar is. Some of this stuff is so funny that I haven't even seen this. Cool. And I think that's it for the trash, as far as I can tell. So that's it for Court of Stars. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.